In the last video, I talked about the Save the Cat story structure, and in this one, I'm going to talk with someone who puts into practice. Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I am Artsume Shae, if you didn't know already. And like I mentioned before, last time I talked about the Save the Cat story structure, and I laid out just how I utilize it to write my story, Space Ultima. And in this video, I will be talking with a fellow webcomic creator about how she utilizes the process. That creator being Hitz, the creator and artist and writer of The Barrier Scrolls, a high fantasy adventure that follows Oriel as she masters her magic. Hitz is super talented, every panel looks like it's straight out of a movie, and she's really into world building and lore and writing, so I knew it was going to be a treat to really pick her brain and understand how she goes through the writing process. So without further ado, my interview with Hitz. Alright, welcome everybody. Today I am here with a very special guest. They go by Hitz. They are a writer and illustrator and creator of the Barrier Scrolls webcomic. She is a very talented creator who is super knowledgeable in the areas of world building and really trying to bring her magical worlds to life. Hello and welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just something that, like, I've been, of course, like, following you for a while, and from your interview on WEBTOON Wave, shout out, is something that I heard you discussing when it comes down to your story process, which is the Save the Cat story structure. And today we are gonna just kind of like, you're gonna pick your brain, gonna discuss some of these things. I have some questions and it'll kind of just go from there. But first I kind of want to start with like a little bit of a primer, that being what would you say your introduction to Save the Cat is, and was it during the process of developing Barrier Scrolls, or was it maybe before that?
It was definitely after I started writing the Barrier Scroll. So the Barrier Scroll actually began as a book, like a novel, and I think like everybody else, I was just kind of, caught in what to do during the pandemic. And the Barrier Scroll is kind of a story. I feel like we all kind of have this intro story where we've had this, narrative in our head for a really long time, and then eventually it turns into like something, either a book or a webcomic or something like that. So in my case, the Barrier Scroll was something that I've been carrying with me a very long time. I decided to finally sit down and write it during the pandemic, and I soon found out that I'm actually not very good at writing at all. And
great time to find that out.
Yeah. Better to do it now or then than after I publish or whatnot. But I shared it with a couple people, and they gave me feedback, and it just wasn't good. And I had some experience with writing in like college and stuff, but not to the degree that is required for someone to like write a really good book or be an author or something like that. So I started to research story structures because, one of the pieces of feedback that I was getting was that my character felt very like she was being dragged along by the plot. And I wanted to make sure that my story was very character driven. And so I did what like most people do when they're trying to research something, is they go on like YouTube or blogs and they watch videos to figure out like how people fix their stories, how people write good stories, like what's the psychology behind a good story. And I ended up coming across a few story structures because when I first started writing the Barrier Scroll, I really was kind of just writing from the seat of my pants. So when I started writing the Barrier Scroll, I found that the world and the story were probably just a little too detailed and a little too emotionally weighty to manage something without like support, without structure. And I figured that I needed something that would help shape like the pacing and the emotional flow. And so Save the Cat is a story structure that I felt, fit what I needed. And I find that with Save the Cat, it's not about forcing a formula, but it's like it's giving the character more agency, which is what I wanted for Oriole, and allowing the world and the narrative to be driven by her rather than her being dragged along by the narrative. So
yeah, no, I love that, making your protagonists more active, making them, because I think with Save the Cat, it's almost like the story structure of what we go through in like everyday life. Like we have our own issues that we go through, trials, tribulations, and whatnot. And it's kind of like a story structure that fits the beat of like real life. So it's great to use that structure, approach your main character, or add your main character to that approach, and then make it where it's like something that people can resonate with. No, they're not in like a fantasy world or a science fiction adventure, but they can resonate with, having like this debate of like, should I do this? Should I do that? Or having like this major catalyst in our life that, triggers what we go on to next. Not to jump ahead, but those are some things that I think, especially with a character, like you want to make sure that they're organically going through the story.
100%. Yep, exactly. You want it to feel natural.
Mm-hmm. In general, like what kind of genres and medias inspire you?
Okay, cool. This is a good question. So I love high fantasy, right? I love stories with, emotional depth. I love sweeping world building. Inspirations range from like, I'm going to probably show my age here a little bit, but like The Neverending Story. I love that movie. Yeah. The Last Unicorn. I had a friend of mine tell me that they just recently watched The Last Unicorn and it doesn't hit like it did when we were little. And I wanted to rewatch it because of the nostalgia, but I'm worried that like as an adult I will interpret it different. So I'm just leaving it. Yeah, I'm leaving it as it is. But I love The Last Unicorn. Love the Dark Crystal. Anything like Jim Henson just hit so good in like the 80s and 90s.
Peak creativity.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. Labyrinth is like my favorite movie. It's like one of my favorite movies of all time. Yeah. And then like if we talk about like world building, Star Wars is, I know it's people will say what you will about Star Wars, but like their world building is immense and carries over from story to story and feels so real. Like with the way that they name characters, the way they name planets, like it just, Star Wars feels heavy and massive and weighty and like is to me a masterclass in world building. I mean, if we're talking about like books that inspire, like obviously Lord of the Rings, and Wheel of Time is like also a masterclass in world building. And then also like video games. I play a lot of video games. I think some of the best storytelling out there is done in video games and they don't get enough credit for it. Mm-hmm. Also showing my age again, but like there's a game series called Quest for Glory. There's like 7 of them out, but it's really old. It's like if you go and look at pictures of it, there's like the characters are all pixels, pixels and
like
stuff.
Lara Croft angles.
It's like worse than Lara Croft. Yeah. But the storytelling in Quest for Glory is so good. And then like Dungeons and Dragons too. And then I guess if to wrap up, I guess, inspirations, because this is probably its own YouTube video or podcast.
We can geek out all day.
No. But for art, I would say like 80s and 90s animation. I love that vibe. I try to make all my panels feel like they're plucked from, a movie or a series or something. And then just straight up Western comic book artists like Michael Turner, the late Michael Turner. It is a loss that he's no longer with us, but I just love his art. It's so good. Yeah. And Mark Silvestri, like these guys are gods at what they do. And I had somebody comment in my on one of my Instagram posts recently telling me that my work reminded me of like Michael Turner's, and I was like, oh, that is the highest of the high compliments. Like I was writing on that. So it's really cool when people pick up on, you know, the vibes or, you know, the genres that inspire you, and they see that in your work. It's like it's so fulfilling and totally worth it.
Yes, because that's the thing, like, we are an amalgamation of, like, all the things that inspire us.
Yes.
And I just find it so funny because people will often be like, oh, like, I don't want to do this story or that story because I feel it might feel too much like X, Y, and Z. And I always say, like, no, do it, because you are not just inspired by that thing. And when it goes through, like, the filter that is, you know, your mind and your creativity, you're gonna come out with, like, a different product. And yeah, if, like, somebody does say, hey, this really reminds me of X, Y, and Z, then I would say that's probably the biggest compliment.
100%.
I actually got some comments on Space Ultima that was, like, comparing it to, like, those, like, 90s sci-fi anime. And I was like, oh, you don't understand how amazing that is to me.
It's true. You ride that high for, like, weeks. Yeah, like, people have no idea the impact that it makes. But yeah, I mean, most storytelling is just rehashed, you know, same story rehashed and told through a different lens. Like, you know, like my story, The Barrier Scroll, like how many protagonists have gone on a journey to, you know, I mean, just like, you know, it's like how you tell, yeah, exactly, hundreds and hundreds. So it's like the way you tell it is unique to you, and the way the audience interprets it is what makes it special. So.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So do you ever feel, like, super tied to the Save the Cat structure when it comes down to, like, just how it's laid out, or do you, like, try to customize it to suit your needs?
So I want to preface that, like, I don't consider myself, like, an expert in writing or anything like that. So if you're supposed to stick to it, then listen to the experts. Yeah.
Right, fair, but...
But I will say that for me, and I always, like, when people ask for advice too, I always give the advice that, like, do what feels right, you know, do what feels right to you. So, like, for me, I would say initially, when I first picked up the story structure, and just because I didn't know what I was doing, I did stick to it. It was kind of like a crutch for me. I guess I'm saying that I do stick to it somewhat, right? It's definitely good for an overarching story and, you know, the story arc and the main beats that are supposed to happen. Like, I think that's important. And even within that main story arc, like, there's things like character arcs and, you know, character growth and mini arcs, and, you know, even the romance of my two leads uses a structure that's similar to Save the Cat. It's called Romancing the Beat by Gwen Hayes. Highly recommend. But, like, at an episodic level, I switch a little bit, and I use this method by Lisa Cron. So Lisa Cron writes a book called Story Genius. Mm-hmm. I love this book. It's probably the most, like, dog-eared book I have for all the writing literature that I have, and I really, really highly recommend it. But I use it for, like, episodic writing, and the way that I break it down is I use, like, scene cards for the episodes to make sure that, like, the episode that I'm writing supports the progression of the plot, right? Or like the story beats that I've set up with Save the Cat. So I use it as, like, a way to support the Save the Cat structure. And then I do that to, like, tie directly into the protagonist's, like, internal struggle. Mm-hmm. We can talk about that a little bit too. But, like, I just think that's really important to tie that back to make sure that your story is being character driven. I'll keep saying that. I'll keep pushing that. Yeah. And then excuse me. And then this cause and effect system makes the episode that comes after it inevitable, like, when you set it up like this. So it makes for really cohesive and purposeful storytelling, which is something that I did not have prior to a structure. So I use, like, a couple tools at my disposal to make sure that, you know, the story is cohesive, that it feels right, that it's being character driven. For example, like, my main character, Oriole, this isn't a spoiler, but she's, like, being taken to Vol to, like, get good at her magic. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very difficult to fall into the trap that like, oh, well, she's being escorted to Vol. There's nothing she can do to like alter that destiny, right? But like when I went back and I rewrote that, I made sure that all the decision making that was happening was being made by the main character, regardless of the fact of their destination. You know what I mean? So everything was being driven by her, even though the end result was still the same. How they got there, though, is being determined by the main character.
Yeah. Unless your character is literally being kidnapped, every decision, everything that needs to happen should be, you know, have some type of thought from your main character.
Right, totally. And even like the characters that, like if it's a scene where your main character isn't there, right? The decisions that those characters should be making should be directly affected by your main character, even though they're not in the scene, you know?
Yeah. That's a good thing because, yeah, like, just because your character is off, not being seen at that moment, doesn't mean that there is not weight from them or their decisions. That still exists, and that's the important part of, like, that world in general. I kind of see it as, like, kind of, like, less of a linear thing and more of, like, kind of like a branching map.
Yep.
Because I feel like for me, for example, with season 2, as I'm writing this, I have filled out the outline, but now that I've filled out the outline, I am kind of moving certain pieces and they're kind of weaving themselves around each other, but they're still weaving themselves forward. So that's a great way to think about that. So go ahead and walk us through your process.
Okay, so when I started using the Save the Cat structure, I think one of the first things that I did was, and I hit on this a little bit earlier, but is identifying like the emotional arc of the protagonist, right? Like, what is her misbelief? How is that belief going to be challenged? So in like Oriel's case, you know, she wants to find the barrier scroll, right? She thinks it's going to prove her worth. She thinks that if she finds it, she'll matter. Her powers will have a purpose, right? And then how you get there, right, is in the story. The proof is in the pudding, basically. So you get to play with that misbelief throughout the story. Like, how does it affect her decision-making? How does it affect her relationships? And then, you know, what's rad is, like, almost every character that's important to your plot is going to have a worldview that you can challenge. So you can kind of start with that. I think starting with your character's misbelief is going to help you build on your Save the Cat structure. I'll map, like, the broader story arc. And granted, so sorry, I'm tangenting a little bit, but like Barrier Scroll is going to be like 3 seasons or books. I haven't really decided what I'm going to settle on, seasons or books, but all 3 of them have been like, you know, mapped out with Save the Cat. And it's just a matter of like going in and taking some of the writing that I did with the novel and then like making it more episodic. So that's what I'm in the process of doing right now. So I'll map the broader story arc, which I've already done. And then that gives me kind of a, you know, a sense of like pacing and momentum. And then there's like, there might be beats that are like so substantial that they can kind of be broken down into like mini beats or mini arcs. And then like once I have that bigger picture and I have like an idea of like the mini beats or the mini arcs, I'll break it down by episode basically. And then this is where, and I hit on this earlier too, but like I'll take the Save the Cat story beats and I'll pair that with like the Story Genius scene cards to make sure that like every episode moves, you know, both the external plot and also the internal character arc forward, you know? So when I use Lisa Cron's scene card method, it helps me track 2 things. You know, it helps me track like what's happening externally, like the plot, and then what's happening internally, like how that reinforces the character's misbelief. Those are like the 2 big things for me. And then that way, you know, Save the Cat and the scene cards helps me like ensure that every episode feels watertight, you know, and purposeful. And, you know, I love Lisa Cron's book because a lot of her storytelling is steeped really deeply in like the psychology of, you know, storytelling and the way that human beings think and respond to good storytelling. So big thing is like using the Save the Cat as an overarching story structure. And then when it comes to like webcomics and writing for webtoons, I think getting episodically down to the nitty gritty and taking those beats and stretching them out, across multiple episodes has worked for me. And then I think like with web comics and webtoons in general too, like you always kind of have to look for like a very specific, I mean, I don't want to call it a cliffhanger because you don't always have to end on a cliffhanger.
Like a hook.
Yeah, like a hook.
Yeah.
Like, what's going to happen next? And it can be anything. It doesn't need to be... Like, I ended one of my episodes with an explosion. Everybody was so mad at me. But, it doesn't need to be that dramatic. Yeah, people were like, what's going on? It doesn't need to be that dramatic, but it should get the readers wanting to, jump to the next episode. Mm-hmm. And that is also something that, like, you don't get that from Save the Cat, and you don't get that from, like, these... books on how to write literature. It's like, that's something you kind of learn as you're making a webcomic along the way, is that you just have to hook the audience for the very next episode. So it's a nice balance of like making sure they want to come back for the next episode, but making sure that you're laying out those story beats for your story.
Yeah, and we were talking a little about that beforehand, how the resources of just writing comics in general is... And I'm so glad that you also said this, because I was like, am I the only one? Like, can I not find a single book on writing comics? But I think that my approach to it was similar to how people approach writing a TV show, because that's kind of like what you are describing exactly, is how, yes, this episode can be its own entity. It's got a arc on its own, a motivation moving forward. But at the same time, following every episode of that season tells a greater story. I think my approach to writing my webcomic was beforehand very much like graphic novel focused, where we're taking time to breathe in these things, versus with how a webtoon or a webcomic is, it's a lot quicker pacing. And I think that's great, because in a way, Save the Cat helps inform how you can, get those episodes to keep that person scrolling, keep that person clicking on the next thing.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I think one of the main story beats in Save the Cat is like the catalyst. And for webtoons, they tell you, like, you need to hook, I'm air quoting, but can't see me. You have to hook the reader within, 3 episodes. Mm-hmm. And so I did that with my catalyst. I put my catalyst at the 3rd episode.
Yeah.
And so those are, there's ways to use Save the Cat, or honestly any story structure. I know we're talking about like Save the Cat today because we're both, big fans of Save the Cat, but there are a lot of story structures that have things similar to the catalyst, right? I think some other story structures call it like when their world turns upside down. I'm not like super versed in the terminology, but like every story structure has, a moment where the main character's world completely upends itself, right? And then they are in a completely different experience, and then thus the story starts. So, yeah, I think using the story beats to your advantage when it comes to storytelling on Webtoon is like a huge boon with Save the Cat.
So many like very interesting things, especially to like talk about them out loud. Mm-hmm. I know when I first discovered Save the Cat, it just started going through like watching movies and TV shows and things. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things, it's like you can't unsee it.
It kind of ruins movies for you, doesn't it? Because you're like, ooh, it's the dark night of the soul.
Yeah. There's this YouTube channel that I definitely recommend. They do really informative videos about like different tropes, different motifs in media. But it's called Studio Binder. And so, they definitely broke down the beat sheet in that. And I'm like, well, now I can't watch The Matrix the same way again.
It's funny, too, because, like, I think The Matrix... So, the one book that I really love... there's a bunch of Save the Cat books, by the way, if people are wondering. But, like, the Save the Cat book that I really love is the Save the Cat Writes a Novel by Jessica Brody. I think the OG one is by Blake Snyder. But the one by Jessica Brody, I think, actually has real life examples of like movies and literature in here, and one of them is like The Matrix, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
That's like textbook.
Yeah, for sure.
So what advice would you give people using this structure and like kind of approaching it maybe for the first time?
I would say don't treat it like a checklist. Like, don't treat the beat sheet like, oh, I got to hit this beat and I got to hit this beat. I would say use it as a tool to guide, the emotional pacing and the story flow, right? I think identifying your character's, wound, fatal flaw, whatever you want to call it, and then build your whole story around their transformation. And then, I think that's really important. I think the beats aren't just about what happens, but like how your character is changing. I'll keep harping on that. You always want to tie the external events back to the internal journey. And then especially in like, episodic formats like webcomics, you don't have to hit every single beat in one episode. Some beats can unfold across multiple episodes. Like I've had a couple arcs in my comic already. It's one beat, but it's like, it's like 6 episodes long. Yeah. So you can have fun with like, describing your beat to readers and things like that. Just as long as you hit it and as long as, what people take home is what you're trying to communicate, I think that's perfect. And then, I try to use Save the Cat as like a way to clarify why a scene exists. I do a lot of editing. I do way more editing than I probably should, and I'm always asking myself, like, what is changing here? Is her belief being challenged? If nothing changes, maybe I take the scene out. I've been known to just pull scenes that don't make sense or, feel like filler. I know that like anime loves filler, but I try not to. Yeah, anime is like notorious for filler, but I try not to with WEBTOON because I want to make sure that the readers stay engaged. So yeah, the big takeaway is don't feel beholden to the structure. I would look at it as more like a tool rather than something that's going to box you in creatively.
Oh yeah, for sure. And in my previous video, I go through each beat, but at the same time, it's like that's just for informational purposes. Take it with you what you will, because I think there is a point towards the end where some of the beats, it kind of gets a little hard to distinct between them. Because, it's like you've got Bad Guys Close In, All Is Lost, Dark Night of the Soul. Like, those, like, they start to kind of, like, become a little bit morphed. But if that's the case, well, maybe then do kind of, like, join them all together in a way. And for me, like, season one kind of ends at the all is lost point. And so at that point, it's like, well, I don't need to force myself to write in all these other beats if it doesn't apply to that season's arc.
Exactly.
So yeah, definitely. I like that because I think when people see it, especially when you're like a first time writer, I get a lot of people who they're, always drawing, artist, illustrator, but they've never taken the approach into writing, but they've got all these ideas in their head. So yeah, great explanation of saying that it is a tool at the end of the day and not a rigid guideline.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you hit on something too that I'm really super passionate about. Like, oftentimes you see people and they'll ask you like, is my art good enough for a webcomic? But you rarely see people asking, is my story good enough? Yep. And I just like, for me, story is like so important. And like good art is gonna hook people and they're gonna think it's interesting. But like if you have a bad story, nobody's going to want to read it, And oftentimes, like, a really excellent story will save bad art, So,
quote unquote, bad art, right?
Yeah, I mean, whatever, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But I think that new creators, especially, and I ran into the same issue, so I'm not pointing fingers. I'm part of the problem. But like, I think that we, when we think about webcomics as a visual medium, we are not necessarily thinking about like the writing and the narrative and the structure that supports that visual medium. And it's just so important. And like you mentioned earlier, you were looking for resources on how to find writing for webtoons and webcomics, and it's like it's non-existent, and it's not out there. I looked. I couldn't find it.
We tried, guys.
I did my due diligence. Yeah, it's just not out there, and I don't know if it's because it's sorely overlooked. I think sometimes because people don't, writing is they think it's a byproduct, but really, I would like if you had to ask me how I would see the importance, I would 50-50 split it at the very least. Yeah. So I would love for videos like this, educational content like this, to just flourish a little bit more, because I would love to see people put the same amount of love and TLC into the illustration and drawing that they do into their writing. Like, I spend equal parts, I think, writing and editing and also drawing and illustration.
Yeah, it matters. So if you're watching this, and I mean, I don't see it as daunting. I think that it is just the basic parts of writing, like, a basic story, like, pretty much. And yeah, you can kind of go in with the story structure and move it around. Like, I love subverting tropes. That's one of my favorite things in media, is when you go into a story and the narrator takes you down this path, and then they kind of switch things up a little bit, and then you're just like, oh, I thought it was this story, but in fact it's this one. I love when that happens. So this is not to say that you can't get a little crafty, but it's almost like you can't go do BMX tricks if you don't know how to ride a bike. Like, let's just be honest.
That's such a good analogy.
Like, you gotta kind of go on those training wheels, learn to do the basics, and then get crafty. And I think an important thing to know too about story is that's going to give your comic longevity, because styles change, trends come and go, but if your story is something that really can, like, hit home with a lot of people, that's going to keep it in people's minds for a really long time, outside of, like, what's popular. So okay, cool. So which part of the story would you say is maybe your favorite to write?
So I've been laying the groundwork for a lot of, like, gotcha moments in the barrier scroll, and I don't know what you call those from a literary perspective.
Oh yeah.
I in my mind, I call them, like, gotcha moments, but it's like, it's like the big payoffs that you're kind of working towards in your narrative, and you're leaving little breadcrumbs, right? And you're just laying that subtle groundwork, and then finally you deliver on the scene that kind of, like, flips everything, and then people are like, wait a minute.
Yeah, like a twist. Maybe a twist?
Like a twist. Yeah, like a twist for sure. But just kind of like moments, like unexpected moments that people were just, like, you as the creator, you as the writer have been working towards it.
Yeah.
And there's little lead-offs to it, and then people go back and they read the story and they're like, holy Toledo, like, you were, you've been thinking about this since, like, season 1. So, like, there's stuff I'm laying the groundwork for, like, right now that will not even come to fruition until season 2, season 3. So I'm putting in the work. I don't know what you call those, but, like, like the gotcha moments. I love writing these. And I don't know, don't be like me. Like, we were talking about, like, writing simple stories and stuff like that. I think that, do as I say and not as I do. Like, I am kind of biting off more than I can chew with, like, an epic world building. Like, it's a little much.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely more of, like, a plotter than a pantser. There's, like, pantsers and plotters, and I'm definitely a plotter. I just can't. There are people who write from the seat of their pants, and that ain't me. That's not me.
It takes the guesswork out of it, because when I want to be in draw mode, I want to be in draw mode.
Yep, totally. So, I think that, whatever I can do to make my story feel, layered and alive, and, like, I love those moments, because the payoff for them is, like, so good.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, blink and you'll miss it. All right, so would you say that there are any things that you want to leave with folks before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I think we predominantly hit on Save the Cat today, but I think that there is, like, a plethora of story structures out there, and I think if story structure is something that is interesting to you and you want to incorporate into your work or your webtoon or your webcomic, you know, do your research and figure out which one works for you. We're big fans of Save the Cat because, like, for me, I like to think about my webtoon cinematically. You know, it's really great for like episodic content. I think initially Save the Cat was written for plays or like for playwriting or screenwriting. So it kind of has those vibes at a cinematic level. And for me, you know, I think Save the Cat just worked. You know, it was kind of hitting the Goldilocks zone, the balance between structure and then like the emotional pull of the characters. But there are lots of other structures out there. There's like, you know, the 7-point story structure, the hero's journey, story circle. There's a bunch of them, and they're all kind of similar, right? They all kind of have their similarities. You have like a flawed character pushed out of their comfort zone. They endure hardship, they face truth, and then they emerge changed or not changed, right? Depending on how you write your story. They're all kind of similar. So you have to figure out what works for you and what works for your story, and then just kind of go with that.
Absolutely. And yeah, I would also say, you know, don't be intimidated by it. You know, this is not something that's like a hard and fast rule. Just the fact that there are so many like story structure versions out there just means that you want to find whichever one really resonates with you. So I think it's been a helpful tool for me, and I hope that this video reaches whoever you are. If you're writing a comic, webcomic, webtoon, that this can help you make that dream a reality. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Jay. Like I mentioned before, it was really such a treat to, you know, geek out with her, discuss some really helpful story techniques, and just all of the above. You can find Jay on Instagram, which is at The Barrier Scrolls. She also has a website, thebarrierscrolls.com, which has her lore, her world building, and of course, her comic. And you can also read The Barrier Scrolls on her website or wherever you read webcomics. I'll have all of her information linked in the description so you can easily find ways to read her story and find out more. If you like this video, please consider giving it a like. That really does genuinely help out. And to see more like this video and some of my other ones, definitely consider subscribing. I am Artsume Shae. That has been all from me. I really hope that you enjoyed this discussion, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye!